Hi, I'm Dr. Cassi from NAVC's Vetfolio and the host of Vet2Vet. Today we're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion in the veterinary industry. The numbers paint a rather homogeneous picture with more than 70% of veterinary students identifying as white, as reported in 2020. And that lack of diversity doesn't necessarily reflect the general pet-owning population we're trying to help. Joining us is Dr. LaTanya Craig, formerly Assistant Dean for Inclusive Excellence at Purdue University's College of Veterinary Medicine, and now the American Veterinary Medical Association's first Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. The Journey for Teams program, created by the AVMA in conjunction with the Veterinary Medical Association executives, is designed to give every member of the veterinary community a pathway to foster DEI in our workplaces. So hello, Dr. Craig. I'm so glad to talk to you about Journey for Teams because I think the question we all ask is, how can I make a change on an individual basis? How can I make a difference?
No, thank you all for having me. So Journey for Teams is an opportunity for you to dive in and deepen your knowledge on diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think sometimes when we hear diversity, equity, and inclusion that we get so overwhelmed by the concepts. And so it's an opportunity to break down those concepts in a way that is meaningful to us. But then it's also a way for us to address the whole idea of the busy veterinary team. And so what Journey for Teams does, it's a micro-learning module. We say that the modules are about 15 minutes. We have 3 components of Journey for Teams. So for instance, there's what we call a route narrative, which is a 1,000-word essay on a particular concept. In addition to that, there's also a 5 to 6 minute video for folks to explore more information about that concept. So if you don't have time to read it, you can at least look at the video. And it's enough information there that could inspire some behavior change. And then there's a third component, which we have a 3-2-1 worksheet, which is designed after you look at that video or after you read that roots narrative. It's an opportunity for you to apply that information.
Okay, it sounds really comprehensive in a way that, like you said, will fit into a busy veterinary practice and make it really doable to implement.
It is, and it's designed to be that way. And many of the reviews that we've gotten from folks that have taken the modules that exist now have said it was very easy, it was very thorough, but useful information that could be applied to any workspace or place. And so we've gotten some real positive reviews about how it's being used in practice. The other piece that I should mention, one of the things that we emphasize in Journey for Teams is that while you can go on this journey by yourself, we really encourage the team setting. But if you wanted to do it on your own, we also have something that's called a navigator. So what a navigator is, if you are a part of a veterinary team and there's someone who wants to serve in a facilitation position, we have tools for them to lead those staff meetings, tips on this is how you introduce this concept. This is how you run the meeting. This is how you insert the video. This is how you introduce the 3-2-1 worksheet. And so we do encourage folks to identify a navigator that would be willing to facilitate those discussions. There's a whole guidebook on things to expect in the meeting. How do you handle difficult conversations? Or how do you continue the conversation if you run out of the 15 minutes? It is very detailed because what we want folks to do is we don't want there to be any reason that stops individuals from engaging in these concepts. Yes, it might be overwhelming, but we're giving you tools to really break it down to where you're not looking at this as a deterrent of this too challenging or there's so many barriers here. Anybody can get involved. It also recognizes that everyone is on a continuum. There are gonna be some folks that already know about some of this, but hopefully we've got some tools in there that really sparks interest or enlighten them on something they may not have known. But then it's also for folks that might be introduced to the concept who really just need more in-depth information in our learning. But then we also want to encourage self-reflection regardless of where you are on the continuum, how does this apply to your lived experience, and what can you do after you've been introduced to the concept on applying it to your life? I think one of the biggest things with DEI is that you have a lot of individuals that might have heard about DEI and they hear about these concepts, but they don't necessarily know how practical it can be or how to implement it. And so that last piece is where we put a lot of emphasis. Not only are we introducing you to the concept, but we are showing you how it might evolve in your life, but then how can you address those things if these things show up as challenges. And then the overall or the outcome of that is to inspire behavior change. And in that behavior change can also help with building positive client relationships, which also means improved patient care. And then it also means that it's increasing a work culture that's positive, where folks want to engage, be connected, be willing and introduced to showing up, to their true self. We hope that all of those things kind of take place at once.
Gosh, I feel like you're just really answering that question of how can I be that change? How can I make a difference? You're talking about people showing up and being their true selves. Of course, it's workplace satisfaction and gets into a whole bunch of other concepts. Better patient care, which is what everybody wants and gets us all up in the morning. So it sounds like a really exciting program.
It is. And hopefully folks will be encouraged to do it. Now, I can tell you, if you go to the website, journeyforteams.org, it kind of outlines all of the materials that you can have access to. There's a welcome webinar on the website. It's about a 15 to 16 minute welcome webinar that introduces you to the platform of Journey for Teams. And in that welcome webinar, it outlines, what are the objectives of Journey for Teams? What can you expect from the 3-2-1 worksheet? What can you expect from the modules? And it's broken down into categories. So the way in which we do all of the concepts, and it will show up again on our worksheets, we talk about the understanding piece. So this is the what is it that I understand about this? There's the awareness piece of getting exposed, but then there's also the transformation piece, which is how does this show up in your life, and what can you do to change it, which is the accountability piece. There are modules that are available on our site now. The first one is called The Power of Diversity. That's actually led by myself. There's a 3-2-1 worksheet. There's also a navigator topic guide for whoever wants to facilitate those discussions. And so what we've committed to doing is 30 modules over 30 months. And so the modules are being released at the top of every month. It's open access, totally free, right? Because I'm sure people are watching, like, how much does it cost? It's totally free. And there's no excuse, because it's only just a few minutes, of your time that you can insert that in. And we know that people are gonna take them, they're gonna gravitate towards certain topics over others. We encourage for folks to do them in order, but if you can't do them in order, it's totally fine. You're not missing anything, but we do kind of put some things in there. Go back and review Module 2 if you skipped Module 2 when you are looking at Module 3. But we just want to make sure that folks have that holistic experience. But you are certainly, it's certainly flexible for you to kind of pick and choose what you do when you want to do it.
So you did the module on the power of diversity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and, kind of in detail what types of topics are covered?
Sure. So in the power of diversity, it really introduces folks to the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion and a new way of looking at those concepts. So in it, we talk about diversity is, who's in the room. Then we define equity as who is in the room and who's not in the room. And then inclusion, those folks that are in the room, or even those folks that are not in the room, do they have what they need to feel like they belong? And so that's an easy way to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there are 3 particular areas that we talk about in the power of diversity. The first one is mental shortcuts, which are things that we all do, and most of that comes from our lived experience, which informs the quick decisions that we make, which can really speak to the unconscious bias piece, which we explore more in the second module of unconscious bias. But the second component of that is cultural conditioning, which really deals with the things that we absorb from the environment and how that shows up and how we interpret different things. And then the third piece are our comfort zones, which are all of us have comfort zones, and we kind of stick, with that. So cultural conditioning is the information that we interpret from the environment that translates into what we consider as our norm. So an example that I can give you, a very simple example. So if I were to ask you, and I actually say this in the Power Diversity module, what type of toothpaste do you use? And then if I ask you that question, most folks will, tell me, oh, I use Crest or I use Colgate, or they'll say whatever. But then when I ask that question of why do you use that toothpaste, the common answer that I would get is, well, my family member has always used it, but we never question why we use it. And there's several different types of toothpaste, thousands actually, but we tend to gravitate towards that one that we've always used. And so that's kind of how cultural conditioning takes place, where we get used to one thing, we're being introduced to one thing, we start using it, it becomes a part of our norm, and then we never question why. And so what I always encourage people is to question everything, because then you might find that whatever decision that you've made on something, perhaps it might not serve you as well as something else could, but you just got to be willing to step out of your comfort zone and be willing to try something different. But that's how you kind of check cultural conditioning, which is asking those questions of why, and it might lead you down a different path.
And I will say the toothpaste one, I was like, whew, I think I'm in the clear here because I use Sensodyne, because otherwise I'm miserable. But also it makes me think of a quote that I really like, and it's "Don't believe everything you think." And just kind of, like you said, just continuing to question, well, why are you doing it that way? So really interesting to think about. Although before I had to switch to Sensodyne, I was a Crest person, and it was 100% because that's what I grew up using.
So one thing I could tell you is when I was at Purdue, I asked the first year class during orientation, what kind of toothpaste did they use? And in unison, they all said Crest.
Huh.
In unison, the entire class said Crest. So during onboarding, which was a whole week, on the third day of onboarding, because we had DEI sessions, I bought the entire DVM class Colgate because I wanted them to try something.
I love it. I can just hear your passion and your excitement for all of this. Tell us more about how this all came to be. Tell us about yourself, about the process of creating this program.
Yeah. So when I came on board to AVMA, it was already introduced to the veterinary field that Journey for Teams is something that AVMA wanted to do and wanted to dive in. When I was brought in to implement the idea of what will it look like, what kinds of modules will it entail, and how can we make sure that we're really moving the needle. How can you inspire behavior change if we don't make sure that we are exposing individuals to the concepts, making sure that we're building a system where people can really grasp it and understand it? And then the last piece is, how do we create tools to where folks are inspired to have behavior change? Now, as far as how I got to this place, I was actually, in my previous position prior to Purdue, I served as Director of Graduate Recruitment and Diversity Retention at the University of Louisville. And I did that for about 5 years. I've also taught a course on Introduction to Pan-African Studies in Hip Hop and Social Movements that I've taught for over 15 years now. And still continue to teach those courses online at the University of Louisville, which I love that job, but I wanted to really focus on a discipline that was not so wide that allowed me to really dive deep. When you have 90 graduate programs under you, there's no way you can do that. Everything is sort of on the surface, and then every now and then you can dive deep with some programs. And so I was looking for a discipline, one, where I would be needed, but two, something that would be different than what I was already doing. Veterinary medicine was not one of the 90 graduate programs or professional programs under me. And so I saw an opportunity to go to Purdue. And Dean Reed, who served as my dean, introduced me to the profession, took a chance on me, and we were able to do some great work at Purdue. And I think because of the great work we were able to do at Purdue, it brought me here to AVMA.
Well, we're so happy to have you in the veterinary profession. We're so happy you're here and doing all of these amazing things. So obviously this is a big program. I mean, 30 modules in 30 months. That's a lot to absorb, a lot to make sure we're getting involved with. So, what are some of the strategies that we can utilize in clinic to make sure we're really getting the most out of this program?
Yeah, so what we try to encourage folks to do, and we know that every setting is a little bit different. So if you already have established staff meetings where you're meeting on a monthly basis, take one of those staff meetings and incorporate Journey for Teams. And it could be at the top of the meeting or towards the end. You certainly want to give yourself enough time to explore the concept, and that you know that every month Journey for Teams is going to be incorporated in a staff meeting in some way. I would start with maybe the welcome webinar is 15 minutes by itself. That way, it introduces the staff to what Journey for Teams is, what you can expect from the platform, and start there. And then as a team, you all can decide how often you meet to talk about Journey for Teams. Some teams may say, you know what, we've been looking for something to do after hours. Maybe this is something that we could do, if not a part of the staff meeting. Or maybe we have a retreat and we introduce many of these modules in the retreat at one time. Or you could just do a staff meeting every month and then have an opportunity for questions at the end. Now, we always say a lot of these concepts, 15 minutes, yes, that's the time that we've allotted for it, but there are going to be some conversations that go beyond the 15 minutes, and I want people to walk into this knowing that it's not all encompassing. There are some things that we just will not cover in the amount of time that we have, but we hope that people are inspired to explore more. If they find themselves just in love with a particular concept, there are additional tools, references, and resources that people can continue to do to continue their education. There's certain tests that they can take on their own or assessments they can do on their own if they really want to learn a little bit more about where they are. But I would certainly say inserting it in staff meetings, and if you can't do it in staff meetings, then grab somebody during lunch and have a conversation about it or to the side. But the great thing about Journey for Teams is it also creates an opportunity for folks to connect with their peers, whether in or outside of the workplace.
Sure. I think one of the things you mentioned in the beginning is people showing up as their true selves. And it sounds like this can really facilitate that conversation quite a bit.
Absolutely.
Very cool. So what's your vision in the long term? What do you hope that people take away from this program in the long term?
So hopefully we have set a platform where folks are more informed about the concepts, and not just more informed, but they're able to see how they can use this in their daily life. And then the behavior change that we hope to see is that folks are able to adapt to the different relationships that they build, that they have more of an understanding of how they should approach those relationships, be willing to connect with individuals, and then connect with their colleagues too. Because what we have found is that, especially when it comes to the workplace, if you feel valued, if you feel seen, you are willing to give more. And if you are at a workspace or a place where people see you and they are willing to connect with you, the likelihood of you wanting to stay goes up. And it's not necessarily all about the money, and sometimes we focus on that oh, it's the pay, but there are other pieces to that, because if people have a great relationship with the people that they work with, they're gonna pause before they decide to go elsewhere, because it's really hard to find places to work where everybody gets along, you feel valued, you feel seen, you wake up in the morning and you wanna stay, and you don't necessarily think about all the time, all the hours that you're putting in, because it's a place where you wanna be. And so all of those things I hope we will be able to see, and then we can even dive deeper after these 30 modules are done, and then continue to talk about how we can sustain the momentum that we've built in those workplaces.
Wow, I feel like you've just illustrated this as like this huge jumping off point that can really help to address a lot of the issues that we have in veterinary medicine. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a whole team of folks that are behind this work, that have been invested in this work, and we have several sponsors who have contributed to Journey for Teams, who really believe in this program, and so we're grateful to them. But I encourage you to at least look at one module on journeyforteams.org, and I assure you that you will learn something, and hopefully it will inspire you to continue looking at the other modules and just continuing to complete the whole platform.
Well, very exciting. Dr. Craig, this has been such a great conversation. I feel like, I feel like I'm walking away learning so much just from our conversation here. I can't wait to dive in to the platform and see what else it has to offer. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you all for having me.
And thank you to the AVMA for partnering with us for this edition of Vet2Vet. Check out navcsvetfolio.com for more of our V2V discussions on various topics in veterinary medicine. And remember, if one animal is better off because of you today, it's a great day.